Thank you for joining us today for our Research Success Workshop series, co-hosted by Advance at UNM and the Faculty Research Development Office. And huge thanks to Julia Fulgham and the Advance team for managing this workshop series. We are incredibly fortunate today to be joined by a highly esteemed group of speakers. Dr. Ellen Fisher, our Vice President for Research, who is also, if you don't know, a chemist and materials scientist. Monica Fishel, the Associate Director for the Faculty Research Development Office, also has many years of experience working with faculty and extensive knowledge of UNM's budget policies. We are also joined by Dr. Peter Fawcett, Chair of the Department of Earth and Planetary Sciences, and Dr. Janie Chermak, Chair of the Department of Economics. And I also want to acknowledge and introduce Dr. Mary Jo Daniel. While not one of our formal speakers today, Mary Jo is the Associate Vice President for Research and may have some additional insights that she can share with us during the question and answer session with regard to compliance and best practices for managing funds. So thank you all very much for joining us today and for your willingness to share your best practices and insights when it comes to budgeting and managing funds, whether those come from sponsored projects or from startup funds. If it is okay, I would like to share my screen so I can show just a few slides. I am Dr. Hannah Torres. I'm the director of the Faculty Research Development Office. And before I hand it over to Monica to get us started, I wanted to just briefly touch on a few basic things, big picture ideas that researchers should be thinking about or at least aware of when it comes to managing money.
Sorry, your slides are not yet showing.
Yep. Okay, I think that I can now. Can you see them now?
Yep. Yes. Yes.
All right. The big takeaway that I really want to get across before we jump in and get started is, I'm sure you know this, but it's always important to emphasize and be aware that the way that funds can be spent depends largely on where they come from. So there are external funds like grants, cooperative agreements, and contracts, which usually have very specific expectations that are tied to them, either something that you proposed you would do or something that was asked of you. And also important to remember is that when it comes to basically any external funding that is coming to you through the university, these funds are administered, managed, and overseen by our Office of Sponsored Projects. So that's who you would turn to typically. And again, it all depends, but typically that's who you would turn to for questions about those kinds of funds. Internal funding, like internal award programs, for example, the We Are One faculty success competitions, or startup funds. These are internal funds that move from basically one UNM account to another. And in many cases, the requirements and restrictions on these funds might be a little less stringent. There are possibly still some expectations for internal awards and such, but there can be fewer restrictions on these kinds of funds. However, no matter what, when you are looking to spend funds that are coming to you through the university, there is overarching guidance about how university funds can be spent. And guidance on how you may or may not use university funds can be found in UNM's University Policy 4000, which I have linked to here. And we can also share these slides with you afterwards. But some examples of things you generally cannot purchase are alcohol, refreshments, entertainment, among other things. So I just wanted to point that out. And I would also encourage you, if you have not taken the grants management training through Learning Central, that's a great resource to learn more about how you can spend funding for sponsored projects, and also check out this policy. I have a few resources listed here, which I won't go through in detail, but again, we'll share these links with you afterwards. But without further ado, I am going to hand it over to Monica Fishel, who will talk for a few minutes about some of the common questions and issues that she has seen in her many years of helping develop very diverse proposal budgets with faculty. There will be time for questions and answers following our speakers, but please do feel free to type questions into the chat as we go as well, and we'll be sure to monitor those. And with that, I will now hand it over to my colleague, Monica Fishel. Monica?
Thank you. Thanks, Hannah. All right, so today I thought I would touch on some of the areas where we tend to find that budgets can be tricky and can be problematic. If there's anything that I'm not covering that you have questions on, please do feel free to ask. Chances are someone else might have that same question. So I'm going to touch on summer salary, student salaries versus stipends, indirect costs, prior approval, and then I just wanted to, we have some new information that's come out from DOE concerning COI disclosures, and I just want to be sure and share that with everybody. Okay, so for summer salary, this is available for those who have a 9-month appointment, and the Office of Academic Personnel, they keep track of and they post the summer salary guidelines, and there's a link to their website. They've not yet posted the summer salary guidelines for this summer, but you can look at last summer's guidelines if you're interested. And a note I wanted to make concerning summer salary is that to keep in mind, if you're submitting to NSF, and especially if you have other NSF projects that are funded or you anticipate will be funded, NSF does limit. My microphone is noisy. Let's see. Try unplugging it. Is that any better?
Maybe just pull the microphone a bit lower. It's not.
Okay. Is that better?
I think so.
Okay, sorry about that. So NSF does limit the number of person months to no more than 2 months, and that's across all of their NSF funded projects. Sure, no problem. And this is really important because I actually saw this very recently on a proposal I was submitting. I'm on an award that was going to be funded by a faculty member who I helped prepare the submission for. And NSF actually did ask this particular PI to kind of resubmit her current and pending support so that NSF could make sure that she wasn't going to exceed the limit. And if you know that you need to exceed the limit of those 2 person months per year, you can request that as long as you put it in your budget justification and you include it in your actual budget as well and justify why you're going to need more than those 2 summer months. So just an important thing to keep in mind, because NSF, to my knowledge, is the only sponsor who has that particular kind of limit. Okay. All right, now student salary versus stipend is an area where it can get really tricky, especially given that sometimes sponsors try to use those terms interchangeably when in fact they're quite different. So I included a checklist kind of questions that you can ponder to decide which is actually the right way to pay the student. And so salary is work. It's the work that's considered services performed and deemed taxable compensation. So the student should be hired as an employee and would be paid through payroll. And the salary includes budget, fringe, health insurance, tuition, and overhead. whereas a stipend is usually for more like a fellowship type of position, and it's not considered services performed. And so it's budgeted typically under participant support costs and is excluded from IDC. Which accounting code processing? What is stipend fall under? I am actually not a post-award expert. So if there's anyone on the call today who has information on that and knows how a student is paid through the banner process on a stipend, feel free to speak up. Oh, that's okay, even no worries. And I can also look into that and get that information for you, Eva. So I'll reach out to contract and grant accounting and find out what that process is for you and get back to you on it. And so it can be tempting to want to put your students down for a stipend because there is no overhead charged, and because you don't have to include the tuition and the health insurance, which can get expensive. However, keep in mind that when you do pay a student on a stipend, there could be tax implications for them that they're going to have to make sure that they comply with. And also, if you've budgeted a student to receive a stipend and they actually need to be charged salary, then that can cut into your budget significantly, and you may not have enough funds. And then vice versa, if you were supposed to pay them on a stipend, on a salary, and you didn't include, you could be overcharging the sponsor because you would have the inclusion of the tuition and fringe and things like that. So it's important to also read the solicitation, because some sponsors will be very specific as to whether they expect students should be paid on a stipend or a salary, and therefore you'll know how you need to hire them. And so this is important to plan ahead for this, to make sure that your budget has what you need in it to complete the work. Okay. All right. Our favorite topic is indirect costs. I'm just going to go touch briefly on this. As you all probably are aware, indirect costs are also known as facilities and administrative costs, F&A, also called overhead. And I've included a link to the OSP webpage, which includes all of our current federal rates, the actual negotiated rate document. And I wanted to let you all know that, in case you weren't aware, as of July 1st, 2022, our rates will increase. And so currently we're at 51.5 for on-campus research, and that will increase to 52.5. And instruction has gone up to 53, and other sponsored programs has gone up to 45. Off-campus rate remains the same at 26%. I just wanted to make sure you were all aware of that. The budget template on the OSP website has been updated with the 52.5% rate, so that's always a useful tool. So if you're using an old version of that template, you should probably think about go ahead and downloading a new version of it. And something else with working with faculty, if you're more accustomed to working with NIH proposals, for example, you know that the total cost, the maximum amount you can request, does not include the indirect costs. It is just your total direct costs, and NIH allows you to include your indirect costs on top of that. However, NSF, the maximum ceiling and floor that they give you does include the IDC. So that's the total project cost. And to my knowledge, NIH is the only sponsor I've worked with that includes the indirect costs as an add-on kind of. So just something to keep in mind too when you're planning your budget. All right. I wanted to touch briefly on prior approvals. So there's a lot of changes that you can make that are basically under expanded authorities and do not require prior approval in writing from your sponsor. So for example, some things that do require prior approval would be, for most agencies, would be a change in scope, a change in your key personnel. If the PI needs to reduce the number of months or the percent of time that they've devoted to the project, 25% or more, we would have to get prior approval from the sponsor. And next slide, please. And if you have subawards on, if you have not included the subawards on your project and then you end up needing to sub-grant to anybody, you would need to get prior approval for that. A transfer of funds into or out of participant support costs. So that's another reason why that area and thinking about those student stipends versus salary is really important, because it's not an easy task to move the money. You do have to get prior approval from the sponsor in order to do that. And if you anticipate you're going to have any foreign travel, best to always include that ahead of time. Same thing with capital equipment, which is equipment that is worth $5,000 or more per unit. And on the NSF website, I wanted to include this prior approval matrix. There's a link to it. And again, you'll have access to that once we share the slides. This kind of gives an overall view of quite a number of the federal sponsors. And it's kind of just like a table that shows you which sponsors require prior approval and which do not for various activities and changes. So it can be just a handy tool to take a look at if you want to find out if a change that you want to make is going to require that kind of approval. All right, and then this is the last thing I wanted to make sure that everyone was aware of. We got word from the Office of Research Integrity and Compliance, ORIC, that they received information from DOE, that DOE is going to now start requiring project-specific disclosures for the COI. Those of you who are used to submitting to NIH will know that this is very similar to that, where NIH also requires project-specific disclosures, which means that in addition to UNM's annual financial COI disclosure that you have to do, you have to, for each and every project you submit to NIH or to DOE, you will have to also submit these disclosures. And ORIC has told us that these new requirements might also apply to projects that are submitted to the national labs, including Sandia National Labs, Los Alamos, and Idaho National Labs. But ORIC is looking into that and will be providing feedback, follow-up information on those particular projects. And those are the main topics I had for budgets, and feel free to ask any questions if you have any.
Thank you so much, Monica. And we will have some time for Q&A after our speaker. So please continue to put your great questions into the chat. That's fantastic. We are going to be switching gears just a little bit now. I think Monica and I, because we got into the nuts and bolts of it, we were the only ones who had some slides to show you. But right now we are going to hear another perspective from Dr. Ellen Fisher, who can share some of her insights as a PI on many different sponsored projects over the years. So Ellen, I will hand it to you now, please.
Yeah, I just wrote down a couple of talking points that I wanted to throw out there, because I think sometimes people don't think so much when they're preparing a budget about some of the things that I'm going to talk about. One, the top one that I have was understanding what your burn rate is. And that basically means how much money are you spending over the course of a month or a year, and being able to think about what are your materials and supplies costs on a monthly basis. And if you're doing something like field work where you're out in the field for a certain portion of the year, like in the summer, and then you're not during the year, that might change from month to month. But if you can come up with a pretty good ballpark figure of what that costs for your particular operation as you start to put together a budget, that's a really nice number to have, even if it's just a round number. And I'll just use as an example, as a in with respect to being a chemist, I'm the kind of chemist that uses a lot of instrumentation. So I always have to figure out what kind of instrumentation, like user fees I have for using different types of instrumentation, but I don't have huge materials and supplies costs on a monthly basis, because we tend to buy things in bulk and we use gases, and it's not like the synthetic organic chemists that are having to buy a lot of reagents on a regular basis. So for example, in my group, I came up with a fairly rough back of the envelope calculation for my group. It was roughly, I think I came up with something on the order of $1,000 a month was what my whole group was spending on those sort of recurring costs that are either charges in instrument facilities or materials and supplies. So that's sort of what I would consider to be my burn rate. And that was based on, say, a group of 5 or 6 students. When I look at my synthetic organic colleagues, they might have a burn rate of $1,000 per month per student. And so that's something to keep in mind as you think about how am I putting together my budget, that you want to think about what your burn rate is. Likewise, as you start to manage a budget, that's another really good thing to have in mind. And another example from my own experience is that periodically I would get a report back from instrument facilities saying, here are your charge. Every month I would get monthly rates, and I would know approximately how much my group spent in the instrument facilities over the course of a month. And occasionally I'd get these huge charges, and usually it came about right before an annual meeting that we would go to, where basically everybody in the group was going to this meeting. So everybody needed to get data. And so generally the couple of months leading up to that meeting, my charges would end up going up in those facilities. But there was also a time where I got a totally off cycle, not be able to ascribe it to anything like that. I got this huge charge, and it happened a couple of months in a row. And what I figured out was that my students were actually doing analyses on every single thing that they made, and they weren't looking at those charges or looking at those analyses as being equated to dollars out of the research grants that we had. They were just saying, oh, I want to run this, I want to run this other thing. And so we started to talk about, when do you actually do those expensive analyses? When are there things that you can do that don't cost as much money? And maybe we could do within the context of what we have available within our own lab, as opposed to in a user facility. And so that's the kind of thing I think that's really important to be monitoring, maybe not on a dollar by dollar basis, but having a rough idea of what your burn rate is, both for preparing budgets and proposals, but also when you are managing awards, that idea of saying, is this a reasonable cost? Am I staying within it? Or are there maybe months or times when that's going to go up for whatever reason, and other times when it should be lower? And if it's not, it can allow you to question what's happening in your group, and being able to maybe modify behaviors, or actually figure out. I've also had times where we were getting charged things that were not actually for us. There was a mix up in the billing. And so, being able to identify that. And that's something I think that especially junior PIs don't always think about, that it's important to really be monitoring those costs. And that is part of your responsibility, your fiscal responsibility as a PI. And then the second thing I wanted to point out, and then I'll just let somebody else talk too, but one of the things that I also feel that sometimes as we start to put together budgets, especially if going after, say, NSF or DOE type funding, that you want to keep in mind that a couple of things. One is that generally speaking, funding agencies tend to cut your budget. So whatever you ask for, they're probably going to cut it at some point. And so you might want to think about how you reasonably or rationally pad your budget a little bit so that you also know where you can cut it if they come back and say, this is really great, we want to fund it, but we're going to fund you at a slightly lower rate. And part of that, as I think Monica pointed out, was that if they do ask you to decrease your budget, you are likely to have to also provide a statement of how the scope of the work might change given the reduction in the cost. So if you've already built into your budget some places where things might be able to come away without harming the actual scope of the work, you're going to be in a much better position to write those kinds of statements to say we can still do the vast majority of the work that was proposed without, so there's not going to be a major change in the scope of the work that was being proposed. And that's just advantageous, is that then the funding agencies will likely look at it and say, okay, we're going to go ahead and let this one go through with a revised budget. If you have a major change in scope, they may say, well, since you're not going to be able to do all the work, then maybe we aren't going to fund this after all. So keep that in mind. I will also say, because otherwise Mary Jo will jump on and say something in contrary, is that I don't mean that you should irrationally add a huge sums of money to your budget in terms of padding it, but do think about thinking about round numbers that would go and how you can again shift those categories maybe a little bit so that you do know where you can cut down on a budget if you're asked to do so. Be rational and reasonable about what you're requesting and making sure that it covers what you can actually do, which is another thing I think we sometimes lose sight of, is that, it does cost money to do the research. And so if you are severely undercutting or under requesting the amount of funds that you need to do the project, you're not going to be able to do it because you just don't have the money. So there's a nice sweet spot in there where you're asking for what you need. You're not being over the top irrational about that, what you need. It really is what you need and not what you'd like to have, but also where you've built in a little bit of wiggle room for yourself with that. So I will just put those two things out there, and we can turn it over to the next person to offer advice as well. I'm also happy to answer any questions you might have along with everybody else.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ellen. So we've heard from Monica about some processes and policies and things to think of when you're developing your budget. And we've got a PI perspective from Ellen on some things to remember as you're spending your awards and how to shape the budget accordingly. And now our next two speakers, we've invited Dr. Peter Fawcett and Dr. Janie Chermak as department chairs to share a bit more about best practices for faculty when it comes to spending startup funds. This is a question that we've been hearing, so we would appreciate hearing some of your insights on that. And we'll start with Peter, please.
Sure. Well, first, thanks for putting this together to the advanced team. This is a great idea. Wish I'd had it when I was a junior faculty. That would have been pretty awesome. And for all of you for tuning in. Actually, before I talk about startup, I was just going to add one or two comments to Ellen's really good suggestions about when you put together a proposal and so on. And I don't know if everybody realizes this, but feel free to reach out to your program manager when you're putting a proposal together. They can seem like impersonal people sitting up in judgment of your proposal and so on. But if you want to call them up or send them an email and say, hey, I'd like to talk to you about a proposal submission idea, they actually love to do this. That's part of their job. And I'm not sure that everybody actually takes advantage of it. So that's a way to get yourself known, particularly as an early career faculty member. NSF likes to try and push some money towards early career faculty to get going with it. And so putting your name out there and talking with your program manager about your ideas is, I think, a really good idea. So startup. It's tricky to say because it's going to be different for everybody, but just some general comments. And I'm coming from a STEM perspective. And so, in our department, there's a lot of instrumentation that people might be interested in. There's field work, that you're thinking about student support, you're thinking about lab supplies and so on. The first comment I would make is that this is the most flexible money that you will ever have in your career to spend on your research. When you started out, I think Tyler's on the call here. So when I was interviewing Tyler, we sat across the desk over here and I said, Tyler, give me a list of stuff that you would want for your startup so I can take this to the dean and so on. And so of course he did. But nobody's going to hold you 100% to what's in that list. If you come here and my gosh, I could work with somebody in this other department and this would be a better way to spend the money, then you should do that, right? We want you guys to succeed, and this money is a way of getting your research program up and going. It's a way of potentially spending money on pilot projects that would make you stronger for an NSF proposal or an NIH or other funding agencies, NASA, whatnot. And the other thing I guess I would say is it's your money, so don't let anybody push you around in how to spend it, whether it's colleagues or chairs or anybody like that. It's for you, it's for your success. And some of the comments that Ellen made about spending on grants, I would say work here too. You want to think strategically about how you're going to spend that money over a couple of years. Now, I have some colleagues in my department that have been here for over 20 years, and they might still have a little bit of startup money left. That's probably not a good idea because when the budget swoops come in, that sort of thing, maybe startup is still sacrosanct, but
nope, it's not, Peter. I've been involved in several conversations recently from the provost office where they're starting to say we are going to put strict limitations on the time over which you can spend startup, because that's specifically what it's designed for, is to start up your research program, not to support it over the next 30 years of your career.
I appreciate the pointer there, and that's kind of my point. I do have some colleagues that have a little bit of money left in there, and I keep telling them, the days of that money are numbered if you don't spend this pretty quickly. So from the early career perspective, you're looking at over a couple of years, you want to spin up your spending. You want to think strategically, what's the best way to do this? And sometimes it's just outright, I'm going to buy this instrument and I'm going to get going on submitting grants to fund the supplies and whatnot. Sometimes you might have the opportunity to get together with other colleagues and say, let's join forces and we can buy this brand new, really cool instrument that'll help my research as well as, maybe several other faculty. And so I don't want to speak for Ellen. I want to be really careful about this, but I have found that if there's a really good idea and there's a really good thought and there's going to be potentially a lot of science and potentially some revenue coming out of it, you may find that there may be welcome ears thinking about ways to enhance the overall productivity of UNM. But you shouldn't think about this startup as something to do just that. This is really for you. And if it makes sense for you to combine forces with other folks, by all means, but there's no expectation in that at all. That's kind of the main things I had in mind in terms of thinking about startup from a STEM perspective. But like I said, this is the most flexible money you will ever have, because when you get grants, it's for a particular project, and that's worth keeping in mind. It's very powerful.
Thank you so much. Yes, and so just as a reminder, Dr. Fawcett is chair of the Department of Earth and Planetary Sciences. And so now we're going to hear from another chair on startup and anything else you'd like to add, Janie, but from the perspective of the Department of Economics. Thank you so much, Peter. Janie?
Thanks. And I'll talk just a little bit about general budgets as well as startup as well. If I talk first about the startup, there are substantial differences in the level of startup depending upon departments that you're in. And being in social sciences, the startup is astronomically small compared to the physical sciences and others. That said, it is exactly as Peter says, that this is this is valuable money. It's valuable in a lot of ways. Number one, when you come in as a new faculty member, it is money for you to use to start to establish your career. And I've seen people do very different things with it. Sometimes they have used it, I think, exceedingly well to place themselves in, where they want to go in their career in the next 3 to 5 years. And that's been things not only in their research, but perhaps in travel, in attending conferences, and things that will help enhance their career as they move forward. I think another thing that often is lost from a new faculty member's perspective is that this is also your first time, perhaps, to be able to manage a budget. It doesn't matter if it's several $1,000s or $100,000. You really should be learning, good stewardship, and you should be knowing what money you have available. And as Ellen talked about that burn rate, if you have specific amounts or specific things you want to do with your startup, I would suggest you really think about when you want to use that and how you're going to use it. Sometimes I see assistant professors come in and they're kind of like kids in a candy factory. I want that and that and that and that, and then their money is gone. I see other people who come in and they save the money almost religiously. Neither of those is probably good for their career or moving forward. It really should be to get you to a point where you have a platform to start your research, to start your career as an academic. And again, it's nice to be able to say, I'm going to learn some good budgeting habits as I start to work with my startup. Now, let me also say that I probably learned part of this because of bad habits that I had early on as well. But if we think really about the startup as well as thinking about budgets when you're going into your first grant, I think there's a lot of similarities. Things that I see that young faculty sometimes do and old faculty do is you get so excited about writing the grant proposal and all of the things that you're going to do in that grant. And then, oh, okay, well, I'm going to have to go talk to FRDO here, or I'm going to have to talk to OSP, and I haven't thought about my budget yet. Your work and your use of the budget have to coincide. That's true of your startup. It's true of any grant that you write as well. You can think of 8,000 cool things that you want to do as research, but you have to make sure that what you're proposing for research is going to be consistent with the funding that is available from NSF or NIH or whomever it happens to be. I think that's one thing that I see a lot of faculty struggle with, and then they start to try to just cut corners. Well, we can still do this, and we just won't pay our graduate students for as much time, or we won't take summer funding, or we won't do X, Y, and Z. Both of those things have to mesh together. And, I think that starts early, and it starts just recognizing that there is always limited money. I think another thing that is different between startup and budgets that you have from, say, NSF is you usually are going to get your startup money either in a lump sum or in maybe 3 or 4 equal proportions. When you start to go to a grant, often what you see is that there is very lumpy spending that people want to do through a 3 or 5 year program. NSF likes to give money out in equal quantities, and spending forward is not a good thing. Everybody will get mad at you. A couple of other things that I would say in general, you may not have gone into whatever your respective careers are to become a budget person, but at the end of the day, you are the one who is responsible. You need to know where the money's being spent. You need to become you need to become a practitioner, I'm going to say, not a connoisseur, but you need to know where the money's going. You need to be able to understand that and to defend that to some degree. So it might be that you're working with the person in your department, but you need to have a good working relationship with them. The other thing I'm going to say is I can't stress enough the fact that you need to work with the folks in FRDO. They are one of the best resources that I think you possibly can have when you're putting a budget together, when you're putting a grant together. I've been doing these for a long time, and Monica is still like, oh yeah, I should have thought about that, Monica. She's great in those pieces. OSP, They aren't trying to make your life miserable. They are trying to help within the budget, within all pieces of this. And then after you get that grant, I can't stress enough that, the grant and accounting folks, they are doing their job and they are doing the oversight. And I often hear my faculty kind of grousing about, well, why can't I do blah, blah, blah? And it's because, again, all of these pieces are important. And my takeaway from all of that is it doesn't hurt to send an email. It doesn't hurt to pick up the phone and call and say, can you help? Can you explain this to me? I need to think about X, Y, and Z. Where people, I think, get in trouble is when they simply think if they ignore it, it will go away. It doesn't. It just becomes more problematic. So, budgets aren't necessarily why we got into research. Startup funds are just like, woohoo, this nice thing that we get when we come to a university. But all of it is to promote the research. It's a necessary part of it. And I think the better you understand them and the better that you are involved in your budgets, the easier your life is going to be, and the better your relationship is going to be with all sorts of other people around the university. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. Those are some excellent points, especially things that really resonated with me, just having served on, different review panels. Paying attention to whether what you're saying you're going to do actually aligns with the budget that you've proposed. People pay attention to that. And also, I appreciate your note about OSP. They really are trying to help. If they just said sure to everything and then let things go through the entire process, there would be much bigger problems that you would have to deal with down the road. So we're very grateful for the work that they do. With that, we do have about 15 minutes now. So I would like to go ahead and open it up for questions. I think most of the questions in the chat have already been addressed, but feel free to type questions in the chat or raise your hand. And remember, we've got some diverse perspectives here. So Tara Drake asks, Dr. Chermak, do you have any recommendations for how to learn those skills of spending money for money ignorant scientists? Those are her words.
Come to the advanced workshops, number one. I think it was Ellen that talked about taking the training, or maybe Monica said that's a good piece to start with. But I would also say that whomever in your department or organization is the person who really is the budget person, and it might be your DA, it might be a budget person, it might be an accountant. See if you can sit down with them and say, I really want to learn this. And the one way that I do this is, I always start out and do my own budget when I'm going to do a grant. I sit down and think about what are the pieces here. Do I understand it? And then I know this may be frowned on, but I actually always still try to keep almost a shadow budget month to month in Excel, just to think that I know where the money's going. And then I basically will go back and talk with my DA on a monthly or, maybe every other month anymore, to see, okay, do I have everything? What have I forgotten? And I think other pieces, especially when you're trying to look at that budget as you're spending the money, one of the things that maybe none of us really talked about is that, again, there's lumpiness in how things are paid out at the university, tuition and healthcare and things like that. So just getting those nuances, but the biggest thing, ask questions. People are always happy, I think, to talk about their expertise. And I have found the vast majority of everybody at UNM that they want to be helpful in pieces. And sometimes it's figuring out teaching or speaking the same language.
And if I could just add on to that, I think that it's entirely within all of our capabilities at the university to ask people to do projections and say, you know, to the person who deals with the accounting within your units, to say, can you run a projection for me based on if I continue to pay 2 grad students off of this grant over the course of next year, can you do a projection on what that looks like? And they can give you like what you have today, and then if you pay that out, and they should be able to do that, because that also can be very, very helpful in planning, especially if you have a long, you know, 3 to 5 year grant and you're partway in and you're like, you know, I don't really know exactly where I am. And maybe you overspent a little bit at the beginning, but it's going to work out because your expenses are going down or whatever. They can run projections. And that can be one of the most useful things, is to ask for a projection based on, you know, a particular set of criteria that I plan on spending over the next, you know, 18 months or something like that. So I think that's another thing that you can ask for, and it shouldn't be that challenging to pull that out.
Yeah, I'll just throw in a comment really quickly too, back to Tara's question, which is, you have, you know, as early career faculty, you hopefully have 1 or 2 faculty mentors in your department, and you could certainly reach out to them about how they manage their grant activity, and then you would get a more, you know, discipline specific sense. You know, maybe choose a recently tenured associate professor if you have such a creature in your department, and get a sense of where they are and how they'd like to run things.
Yeah, and I think that this aligns with what you were just saying, but Darcy pointed out in the chat that seeing other people's budgets was something that was really helpful. And she also asked people for their startup budget and looked carefully at budgets and budget justifications. I think that's great advice too. Are there other questions? I was thinking of sharing, because we have a couple of minutes. I know when I was an early career faculty member, I'm looking for reflections on this train of thought, okay? When I was an early career faculty member thinking about how to spend my startup funds, one of the things I was thinking when I was trying to decide between buying a drone or getting like some kind of conference or training, one of the things I was thinking is, if I buy a drone with my startup funds, it belongs to the university, really. And that made me feel like I should lean more towards something like conference or training. What are some reflections that you might have on that train of thought? I feel like it could be flawed.
I'm going to say yes, it's a little bit flawed, because yeah, you can do, Julia just said in the chat, you can do research with the drone. And to my way of thinking, I'm always about, how do I build capacity? How do I build capabilities? And the drone to me is a way that you're going to continue to be able to use it, maybe for a project now, but also for projects in the future. And others might also be able to use it. So you're building capacity, and you're building the ability for to do different and more kinds of research projects. The other thing that goes into my thinking for that is that it's often a lot easier to find money for travel to conferences that is generally available to faculty. And so not necessarily spending your startup funds on something that you may have access to other funds for another particular activity. And you gave conferences one example, but there's that kind of thinking as well. Is that, are there other resources that you could tap into potentially to do A versus B? And so that's, I think, another piece that I would factor into that decision making.
Yeah, I agree totally with what Ellen was saying. You know, building your research capacity with this, I think, is sort of the key use. And again, you know, for conferences, you know, we do have faculty travel funds, and if there's some special training or some special workshop, there are probably pots of money around UNM that you could go to that would go beyond, say, a travel, you know, just to a national meeting or something like that, that you could probably take advantage of. So again, thinking selfishly, you know, if this builds your research capacity for, you know, the next 5-6 years and helps you get more grants funded, then that's the best use.
Thank you for that. I thought maybe others might be thinking similarly to the way I was thinking. So
I do like, Hannah, I do like the fact that you were thinking about it and trying to parse through what are the relative pros and cons of a particular choice. I just don't necessarily think you made the right choice in this particular example. But there are times when we have to make those decisions, and thinking about what makes the most sense in a particular moment is really a good, rather than just going out there and making a decision on the fly without weighing your options. So
I'm going to jump in and say I've just put the link to the Provost Professional Conference Support Program, which provides, so you can apply for conference travel support. And I want to win points with Ellen and point out that the call for the summer research for faculty as part of the We Are One Faculty Success Program is now out. You can find information on the We Are One Faculty Success Program page on the VPR's page, and the deadline is March 25th. You can ask for up to $5,000 for not conference travel, but research, equipment, supplies, archive travel, fieldwork travel, subvention funds. It's pretty broad. So, and we are once again prioritizing assistant professors and faculty who've been really impacted by the pandemic. And it's a very short application. I know you're stressed. You could do it in an hour.
it does require a budget. So this is another opportunity to get some practice at putting together a budget, but we are very flexible with that budget. We do not need a huge amount of budget justification, and you can round up your numbers you don't have to give us real detailed down to the pennies kind of thing. So we're more like an NSF-like funding agency than than others that are more restrictive.
You do need to spend the money in a reasonable amount of time. Let me just add that.
Yes, absolutely.
Cherry, I just put the link to the We Are One Faculty Success website in the chat as well. And that will share about all of the programs, but we are talking about SURF. So information can be found there. Are there any other questions?
I will just say for the SURF, you can find it if you go to the InfoReady portal as well.
Mm-hmm.
So you can go directly there.
All right. Any closing remarks from our speakers?
Oh, go ahead, Peter.
Oh, I was just going to say, for the STEM disciplines, I jotted this point down and forgot about it. If you are looking at equipment, one of the things that you should be aware of is sole source versus bid. If you have a piece of equipment above a certain threshold, I can't remember what the amount is, but just be aware of it, and you may have to actually go out to bid if it's above a certain amount.
And the one last thing that I was going to leave you with, I actually put this in the chat, but somebody said it to me very early on in my career, and I have found it to be true. And that is that the power is in the spreadsheet. And so really, the money makes the world go round, money makes the research world go round. If you are not proficient with spreadsheets, you're going to be at a disadvantage because other people are. And it really, really can help you get further in your research and also just in your career. So even though I know as scientists, we tend to shy away from these things, it's just numbers in a spreadsheet, but it's very, very powerful if you understand money and how it works at the university.
And I think the only thing I would add to everything, I really agree with both of those, is, there is no glory in overspending your budget, and there's really no glory in underspending your budget. If you've asked for an amount of money, there's a reason for that. And you should have a plan to use that money in the appropriate amount of time.
And I'd just like to say the next advanced FRDO workshop is April 8th. It's called Help, I Need Somebody. And the idea is to help you figure out how to get information, who to ask for all things research related. So if this session has inspired questions related to things we've said and these topics or other topics, please email Hannah or Advance or me, and we will make sure to cover those in April.
All right. Thank you so much. We do have one last question that just popped in. I think it's a great question for Monica, if you're still with us. You had mentioned earlier, Monica, the NSF limit of 2 months for summer salary, but that there could be cases where you might be able to justify receiving more. Do you know what kind of justification is reasonable to ask for an exception?
I think well, obviously it has to be related to the program scope, for instance, and why you would need more time devoted to the project and paid by NSF. But on their PAPPG, they do include a little bit of information. There might be some PIs here who have had to make that kind of a justification. Is there anyone here that wants to speak to that?
I can say we did that in the past for a large project like EPSCoR, where because it was such a large, complex kind of a project, it required more than 2 months salary for lead people. And so what Monica said is it depends on it has to address the scope of the project, and you need to justify what specifically about that project requires additional time beyond the 2 months. And Peter, you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I think in some cases, not all, it may actually require reducing your UNM FTE to be paid for more out of an NSF or a NASA grant or something like that. But I don't think that's every case, and that's not every justification. But I do know of some cases where that did occur.
And I think that sort of responds to the question that came in. Is it possible to cover salary for academic year with a DoD grant? Victoria recently saw her co-PI budgeting it, but didn't quite understand.
Yeah, there's some of the funding agencies at one point in time, several years ago, decided that they were going to calendar year requests as opposed to summer salary in particular. And part of that was to acknowledge that people do work on research projects during the academic year. And so what I've seen people do is be able to shift some of their 9-month salary to summer and with their department, and also then take some of their budget on an extramural fund grant during the academic year. And it is a way of acknowledging that we all work on our funded projects during the academic year. And so it demonstrates effort being given to those projects over the year. I have to say, I'm going to defer to Monica and Hannah about what the rules are at UNM about doing that, but that is something I've seen in other places that people are doing.
So do feel free to reach out to us with more questions. I wanted to touch on those last couple because we still had a few minutes, but we're just about at 1 o'clock now. So you can email us at frdo@unm.edu and we'd be happy to follow up. But with that, I would like to once more just thank all of our speakers, Advance at UNM, for all that you do, and also for all of you for attending and for your engaged participation and excellent questions. Advance will be sharing this recording and some follow-up resources soon, so keep an eye out for that. And I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. Thank you.